What if the most valuable quarterback in the NFL isn't the one making $50 million a year, and isn't the one taken in the first round, and isn't even the one the media keeps talking about? What if the real jackpot pick happened quietly, almost by accident, buried deep in the draft, ignored by analysts, shrugged off by insiders, and dismissed as nothing more than a depth move? Because right now, there's a growing conversation around one name that wasn't supposed to matter this fast. A quarterback who fell further than expected. A player most teams passed on multiple times. And somehow, the same player is now triggering reactions the league hasn't seen in years. We're not talking about box scores. We're not talking about preseason hype. We're talking about something owners pay very close attention to but almost never say out loud. Attention, demand, obsession. While fans argue about arm strength and footwork, something very different has been happening behind the scenes. Jerseys flying off shelves. Search trends spiking globally. Social clips pulling millions of views in places that don't even have NFL teams. And all of it tied to a player making a fraction of what backup quarterbacks earn. That's the part nobody wants to slow down and really think about. Because when a late-round rookie starts outperforming first-round picks in jersey sales, curiosity turns into discomfort. When his name shows up near the top of global search rankings, it raises a question most executives would rather avoid. And when fans halfway across the world start emotionally reacting to a Cleveland Browns jersey, it stops being just a football story. It becomes a business story. And here, where it gets interesting, this didn't sneak up on everyone. The signs didn't appear overnight. The league had hints. Owners had data. And at least one billionaire in Cleveland may have realized something the rest of the NFL overlooked. Not about talent alone, about leverage. Because value in today's NFL isn't just created on Sundays. It's created online. It's created in culture. It's created when a player connects with people who have never stepped foot inside a stadium but still feel invested. And when that kind of connection shows up, it changes how decisions get made. If you enjoyed this breakdown and want to stay locked in on all the latest NFL drama, make sure you hit that like button. It helps the video reach more people who love this content just like you. And if you're new here, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another update, reaction, or storyline as it unfolds in real time. I also want to hear from you in the comments. What do you think about Shedeur Sanders' performance and the Browns' collapse? Drop your thoughts below and let's talk about it. And don't forget to share this video with friends who follow the NFL. Your support truly keeps the channel moving forward. Some fans believe this is why certain narratives never fully made sense, why praise felt uneven, why moments on the field seemed to disappear from highlight shows, why the conversation around this quarterback always felt controlled. And that leads to the uncomfortable thought nobody wants to say out loud. What if this wasn't a mistake by the Browns? What if the fifth-round pick wasn't an afterthought, but a calculated gamble? Because when you line up the numbers, the reactions, the timing, and the silence from certain corners of the league, it starts to look less like coincidence and more like foresight. And if that's true, then one decision may end up reshaping more than a depth chart. It could reshape a franchise, a brand, and possibly the balance of power in the NFL. And that's where the story really begins. When the Browns finally made the call, most people barely looked up. Round 5, pick 144, a spot in the draft usually reserved for special teams depth, long-shot projects, or players expected to fight just to make the roster. When Shedeur Sanders' name came across the screen, the reaction wasn't outrage or excitement. It was confusion. Some analysts hesitated. Others shrugged. A few even laughed it off as a throwaway selection. Because by that point, the story had already been written. Or at least, that's what people thought. Shedeur wasn't supposed to be there anymore. Not after the hype. Not after the college numbers. Not after the attention he drew every time he stepped on the field. And definitely not after teams spent earlier picks chasing quarterbacks with far less visibility. But round after round passed. Phones stayed quiet. And eventually, the draft room moved on without him. So when Cleveland finally stepped in, the narrative instantly shifted. This wasn't framed as a steal. It wasn't framed as a bold move. It was framed as insurance. Depth. A low-risk flyer with no real expectations attached. That framing mattered. Because the moment a player is labeled late-round, the bar changes, mistakes become proof, success becomes luck, and anything positive gets brushed off as temporary. That's exactly how the conversation went. The Browns had already taken another quarterback earlier. This pick, people said, didn't mean anything. But here's what rarely gets talked about. Teams don't operate on narratives. They operate on information. Behind closed doors, draft rooms aren't just watching film. They're tracking behavior, public interest, market reactions, and how certain names move people before they ever take an NFL snap, especially owners, especially the ones who didn't get rich by ignoring trends. And that's where the surprise pick starts to feel less random. Because if this was truly meaningless, why the discussions? Why the reported back and forth inside the organization? Why the hesitation before finally pulling the trigger? Those aren't the signs of a casual decision. Those are the signs of weighing something unconventional. Some insiders believe the Browns didn't stumble into this pick. They waited for it. They watched the board. They watched who passed. And when the opportunity finally presented itself at a price that couldn't hurt them, they acted. No press conference hype. No big declarations. Just a quiet selection that instantly became one of the most talked-about picks of the entire draft. And that reaction alone should have raised eyebrows. Because fifth-round quarterbacks don't dominate conversations. They don't trend online. They don't spark debates about league bias, media treatment, or future franchise plans. Yet here we were, watching a depth pick generate more discussion than some first-rounders. That's when people started asking the question they probably should have asked sooner. What did Cleveland see that everyone else ignored? And more importantly, what if the draft spot wasn't a reflection of his value at all, but a reflection of how uncomfortable the league was with what came next? Because the moment the pick was announced, the expectations were low, but the attention was already high. And that combination is where things start to get dangerous for everyone who thought this story would end quietly. At first, it looked like noise, the kind of early buzz that shows up every offseason and fades just as fast. A few viral clips, some excited fans, a spike in curiosity that most teams would ignore while focusing on playbooks and depth charts. But this didn't fade. Instead, the numbers kept climbing, and not in ways the NFL is used to measuring rookies. While analysts debated whether Shadyer Sanders would even see meaningful snaps, something else was happening in real time. His jersey started moving, not just moving well for a late-round pick, outperforming expectations entirely. Reports began circulating that his jersey was sitting at the top of rookie sales charts, even ahead of players taken far earlier. That alone was unusual. But then came the search data. His name wasn't just trending in football circles. It was trending globally. Search interest spiked across multiple countries at once, placing him among the most searched athletes during certain stretches. That kind of reach isn't normal for a rookie quarterback, especially one drafted on day 3. It's the kind of attention usually reserved for established superstars or polarizing figures at the center of major storylines. And that's when the conversation quietly changed. Because teams can debate talent all day, but metrics don't lie. They don't care about draft position, analyst grades, or preseason depth charts. They measure one thing: demand. Every jersey sold is a signal. Every search spike is a signal. Every viral clip shared across borders is a signal. And when all of those signals start pointing in the same direction, it becomes impossible for ownership to ignore. Especially for someone like Jimmy Haslam. Owners don't think like coordinators. They think in terms of ecosystems, brand growth, audience expansion, long-term value. And suddenly, one fifth-round pick was outperforming high-profile prospects in the areas that actually move franchises forward off the field. What made it even more striking was where the attention was coming from. This wasn't just Cleveland fans. Reports and social clips showed interest from places far outside traditional NFL markets. Europe, Africa, the Middle East, regions where people don't wake up on Sundays to watch division rivalries, but still felt drawn to this one player. That kind of pull doesn't come from marketing budgets. It comes from connection. Some fans online started pointing out something uncomfortable. While other rookies were being pushed by the league machine, this attention was happening organically. No primetime rollout, no forced narrative, just people gravitating toward a name that resonated with them for reasons that went beyond football. And that's where the math becomes impossible to ignore. A quarterback making roughly $500,000 a year was generating the type of buzz teams spend tens of millions trying to manufacture. No guarantees, no long-term commitment, just upside. For a businessman, that's not a curiosity, that's an opportunity. And once those metrics were visible, the pick stopped looking like depth. It started looking like leverage. Because when a player brings attention before he ever brings wins, the value equation flips. And once that happens, the question isn't whether the numbers matter. It's how long the league can pretend they don't. As the attention around Shedeur Sanders kept growing, something else became harder to ignore. The way his performances were being talked about didn't match what people were seeing with their own eyes. Or more accurately, what they weren't hearing at all. Plays that would normally spark debate, breakdowns, and endless praise seemed to vanish from the conversation. Solid throws went unmentioned. Tough situations were glossed over. And when mistakes happened, they were framed as confirmation of every doubt that had followed him since draft night. To a lot of fans, it felt uneven. This wasn't about claiming perfection or pretending every rep was elite. It was about contrast. Similar plays, similar circumstances, completely different reactions. When other young quarterbacks made routine throws under pressure, it became a story about growth and poise. When Shedeur did it, the moment passed without comment. No replay, no headline, just silence. That silence spoke louder than criticism ever could. What made the situation even more noticeable was who eventually broke it. Analysts with no clear attachment to Shedeur, no history of defending him, and no reason to push a narrative started saying the quiet part out loud. They pointed out protection issues. They highlighted play-calling decisions. They acknowledged that the situation around him wasn't exactly setting him up for success. One former quarterback-turned-analyst even went on record saying the Browns hadn't done him many favors, and that, given the circumstances, he actually played pretty well. That kind of comment matters because it doesn't come from hype. It comes from film. And once film enters the conversation, narratives start to crack. Fans noticed it too. Clips began circulating online, breaking down plays side by side. Same concepts, same reads, different quarterbacks, different reactions from the media. The comparisons weren't loud at first, but they were consistent. And consistency is what makes people uncomfortable. Because it forces a question nobody wants to ask. If the performance wasn't the issue, then what was? Some believe the hesitation came from the storyline itself. A late-round quarterback generating first-round attention disrupts the league's usual order. It challenges how prospects are evaluated, marketed, and prioritized. And when that order gets disrupted, resistance tends to follow. Not in obvious ways, not with outright attacks, but with omission. Moments don't get amplified. Success doesn't get celebrated. Conversations get redirected. And slowly, the idea that this isn't real starts to take hold, even when evidence keeps piling up. But while the public conversation stayed oddly muted, something else was happening behind the scenes. The people who needed to know were paying attention. Coaches, players, executives, they weren't arguing on television. They were watching reps, studying reactions, and noticing who showed up prepared when things weren't perfect. That's why the disconnect mattered so much. Because when media coverage feels off, it usually means two realities are forming at the same time. One for the audience, and one for the decision makers. And if those two realities keep drifting apart, it's only a matter of time before one of them snaps into focus. And when it does, the narrative doesn't just change. It flips. While the outside noise kept swirling, the most telling developments weren't happening on television or social media. They were happening on the sideline, in the huddle, and in moments cameras usually aren't focused on. Because inside the Browns' locker room, the reaction to Shadyer Sanders looked very different from the public debate. There were no visible power struggles, no awkward body language, no veteran tension. In fact, it was the opposite. When Shadyer came off the field, he wasn't isolated. He wasn't brushed aside. He was surrounded, listening, talking, being coached up in real time. And the person doing much of that coaching surprised a lot of people. Deshaun Watson, the same quarterback with the massive contract, the same one many assumed would see Shadyer as a threat. Yet repeatedly, cameras caught Watson leaning in, pointing things out, offering feedback, and treating the rookie like a teammate, not competition. That kind of dynamic doesn't happen by accident. Veteran quarterbacks don't invest time in players they don't respect, especially not ones drafted late, especially not ones the media claims aren't ready. And yet, there it was. Quiet, consistent support that never needed a press conference. And that support carried weight. Because Watson knows exactly what it feels like to be doubted, dissected, and defined by narratives that have little to do with football. He's lived under a microscope. He understands how quickly perception can overshadow performance. That shared experience created something rare, mutual understanding without ego. And it showed. During games, Watson wasn't distant. He wasn't disengaged. He was actively involved, talking through coverages, offering encouragement after tough drives, helping Shadyer reset instead of letting frustration take over. That's not something you fake. That's a signal. Meanwhile, Shadyer's response to that environment was just as telling. He didn't deflect responsibility. He didn't point fingers when things broke down. At the podium, he owned mistakes that weren't entirely his. On the field, he kept his composure even when protection collapsed or plays stalled. And inside the locker room, he earned trust the old-fashioned way, by showing up prepared and staying steady when things got messy. That kind of presence doesn't go unnoticed by veterans. And once veterans buy in, narratives lose power. Because locker rooms don't care about draft position or talking points. They care about reliability, about whether someone keeps their head when the plan falls apart, about whether a quarterback commands respect without demanding it. Shadyer checked those boxes quietly. No speeches, no theatrics, just consistency. That's why the sideline moments mattered more than any headline. Because while the public argued about whether he was ready, the people who actually shared the field with him were already treating him like someone who belonged. And in the NFL, belonging is the first step toward becoming something more. Once that line is crossed, everything changes. And the rest of the league usually doesn't realize it until it's too late. The moment caught people off guard because it didn't feel rehearsed. There was no promo, no agenda, no reason for it to happen at all. Yet suddenly, Dwayne Wade, 3-time NBA champion, Finals MVP, one of the most respected voices in sports, was speaking about Shadyer Sanders with a level of emotion that made people pause. Not excitement, not hype. Respect. Wade talked about how Shadyer handled himself, how he spoke in press conferences, how he refused to throw teammates or coaches under the bus, even when things weren't going his way, how he carried himself like a leader without ever needing to announce it. And that's what made the moment land differently. Because Wade isn't known for handing out praise lightly. He's been around greatness his entire life. Hall of Famers, MVPs, superstars who command attention just by walking into a room. When someone like that stops and singles out a young quarterback, people listen. What made it even more striking was the comparison many fans immediately noticed. Wade has spent years alongside LeBron James. He's praised teammates before. He's spoken about leadership before. But this felt personal, measured, almost protective, like he wasn't reacting to highlights but to something deeper he recognized. And that recognition mattered. because it validated something fans had been feeling but couldn't quite articulate. This wasn't just about arm talent or box scores. It was about how Shadyer handled pressure, how he responded to criticism, how he carried the weight of expectations without letting it turn into bitterness. That's the kind of trait that resonates far beyond football, especially in communities that understand what it means to be scrutinized before being celebrated. Some analysts brushed the moment off as a celebrity shout-out, but others saw it differently. They saw it as a signal. When respected athletes from outside the NFL start paying attention, it means a player's impact is crossing boundaries. That's rare, because crossover respect isn't driven by marketing. It's driven by authenticity, by seeing someone navigate adversity in a way that feels familiar, by watching a young athlete choose accountability over excuses in a system that often rewards the opposite. And Wade wasn't alone. Other high-profile figures began echoing similar sentiments, not with loud declarations, but with subtle acknowledgments. A comment here, a clip shared there, quiet endorsements that carried more weight than scripted praise ever could. For the Browns, this kind of attention wasn't just flattering, it was revealing. Because when cultural icons recognize leadership before the league fully does, it usually means something is shifting beneath the surface. The public narrative might lag behind, but perception among peers moves faster. And once that shift starts, it's hard to reverse. The Dwayne Wade moment wasn't about hype. It wasn't about comparison. It was about recognition. Recognition of maturity, of composure, of someone who understands the responsibility that comes with being visible and chooses to handle it with intention. And when someone like Wade sees that, it adds another layer to the story. One that makes it much harder to dismiss what's happening as coincidence. Because respect like that doesn't show up by accident. It shows up when something real is unfolding. The most surprising part wasn't that Shadyer Sanders had fans. It was where they were coming from. This wasn't the usual surge of local excitement you see when a rookie joins a new team. It wasn't just Cleveland rallying around a quarterback with a famous last name. What started showing up online felt bigger, stranger, and harder to explain. Videos began circulating of people reacting to Browns jerseys like they'd just received something personal. Not collectors, not influencers, regular people. Grown men getting emotional, kids shouting his name, families recording moments that felt spontaneous, not staged. And these clips weren't all coming from Ohio. They were coming from places that don't even have NFL franchises, countries where American football is barely accessible on television. Yet somehow, a fifth-round quarterback in Cleveland was becoming a recognizable figure across continents. Europe, Africa, the Caribbean, the Middle East, Southeast Asia. Fans in London, Ghana, Jamaica, Dubai, and the Philippines were posting reactions, tagging clips, and proudly wearing number 12 like it meant something beyond team allegiance. Some didn't even mention the Browns. They mentioned Shadyer. That distinction matters. Because fandom usually follows teams. This followed a person. And that's what made it different from typical rookie buzz. This wasn't driven by highlight packages or league promotions. It was driven by identification, by people seeing something in Shadyer that felt familiar, something that resonated with their own experiences. Some fans said it outright, others showed it without words. There were clips of people explaining why his journey mattered to them, falling in the draft, being doubted, being overlooked despite production, still showing up composed, still refusing to play the blame game. That story translated across borders. And that's not common in football. The NFL has global ambitions, but very few players organically break through without a massive marketing push. When it happens, it usually takes years. For a late-round rookie, it almost never happens at all. Yet here it was, unfolding in real time. Some skeptics questioned whether the reactions were exaggerated. Others wondered if it was all being amplified by social media algorithms. But even critics had to admit one thing. You don't fake consistency at that scale. You don't manufacture emotion across dozens of cultures without something real underneath it. And for the Browns, this kind of attention wasn't just feel-good content. It was data. Every video shared, every jersey purchased overseas, every comment thread arguing about his future added another layer to his value, not just as a player, but as a symbol. A symbol of possibility, of representation, of someone breaking into a space that hasn't always been welcoming and doing it without apology. That's why comparisons started popping up, not to other quarterbacks, but to cultural figures, musicians, icons, people whose influence extended beyond their profession. Whether those comparisons were fair didn't really matter. What mattered was the reaction. Because once fans stop asking, "Is he good?" and start asking, "When can I see more of him?" the conversation changes. At that point, it's no longer about development timelines or depth charts. It's about momentum. And momentum, once it goes global, is something very few teams know how to handle, especially when it shows up faster than anyone expected. Once the emotions settled and the viral moments kept stacking up, everything circled back to one unavoidable reality: the numbers. Because no matter how you feel about Shadyer Sanders, no matter where you land on his ceiling or timeline, the financial equation around him is impossible to overlook, especially in a league where quarterback contracts can define or destroy an entire roster. By every report available, Shadyer is playing on a rookie deal that costs the Browns roughly $500,000 a year. Over 4 seasons, that's about $2 million total for a quarterback. In today's NFL, that number barely registers. To put it in perspective, some teams are paying backup quarterbacks 20 to 30 times that amount. Others are locked into first-round rookie contracts worth 30 to 40 million guaranteed before a single snap is taken. And once you sign that deal, you're committed, whether the player works out or not. That's the part most people miss. Shadyer's contract isn't just cheap, it's flexible. There's no pressure to rush him, no financial obligation forcing him onto the field before he's ready, no sunk cost pushing the organization into bad decisions just to justify the investment. From a business standpoint, that's a dream scenario. And then there's the contrast sitting right next to him on the roster. Deshaun Watson's contract is massive. He's owed guaranteed money that makes cutting or trading him extremely difficult in the near term. Multiple insiders have suggested that the cap hit alone all, but locks him into the Browns' plans for at least another season, regardless of how things unfold on the field. But here's the twist. That expensive contract doesn't block Shadyer, it protects him. Watson becomes the buffer, the bridge, the veteran presence who absorbs pressure while the rookie develops. If Shadyer needs time, it's there. If the situation gets tough, there's insurance. And if things go well faster than expected, the team still holds all the leverage. That balance is rare. Most teams are either overpaying for hope or rushing young quarterbacks into situations they aren't ready for. Cleveland, whether intentionally or not, ended up with a setup that gives them options without urgency. And when you layer in the attention Shadyer is already generating, the math becomes even more lopsided. Low cost, high visibility, massive upside. If he develops into a solid starter, the value is enormous. If he exceeds expectations, the return is almost impossible to replicate. And even if he never becomes the long-term answer, the investment is so small that the risk barely exists. That's why some insiders believe this isn't just a football decision anymore. It's an asset play. A controllable contract paired with growing demand gives the organization leverage in every direction. On the field, in negotiations, and in brand expansion. That's also why the idea of moving on from him anytime soon makes very little sense. You don't walk away from something this efficient. You don't give up optionality when it's this cheap. And once executives start thinking in those terms, draft position stops mattering. At that point, the question shifts. It's no longer, can he play? It becomes, why would we let this go? Now, this is where the conversation shifts from what's happening to what could happen. And it's important to be clear about that. What follows is not a guarantee. It's not a promise. It's a projection based on trends, reactions, and the way NFL franchises typically move when opportunity lines up with timing. Nothing more, nothing less. But when you connect the dots, a future blueprint starts to take shape. Some insiders believe the Browns are quietly positioning themselves for flexibility, rather than committing to a single outcome. With Deshaun Watson's contract likely keeping him on the roster in the short term, Cleveland isn't forced into a rushed decision. That creates a window, a rare one, a period where development, evaluation, and market growth can all happen at the same time. If Shadyer continues to progress, even steadily, the team can afford patience. There's no financial pressure to throw him into chaos, no public demand forcing a declaration, just time. And time is where value compounds. Looking ahead, the Browns are also starring at a major organizational milestone, a new stadium projected to open later this decade. New stadiums aren't just about seats. They're about energy, narrative, selling a future fans want to be part of. That's where speculation starts to build. If Shadyer's trajectory continues upward, even modestly, he becomes a central figure in that future story. A young quarterback growing alongside a franchise entering a new era. That kind of alignment is something teams actively try to manufacture. And when it happens organically, executives pay attention. Some believe this is why the Browns haven't publicly rushed to define roles or futures. Silence, in this case, preserves optionality. It allows the organization to read the room, not just the locker room, but the global audience watching from afar. Because if demand continues to rise, it creates leverage in unexpected places. Sponsorship interest, international visibility, merchandise, media focus, all without a single snap being guaranteed. That doesn't mean the plan is set. It means the door is open. And that's what makes this moment so unique. Most quarterbacks are either labeled the future or written off early. Shadyer sits in a rare middle ground where growth, curiosity, and business upside coexist. If he succeeds on the field, the story writes itself. If he grows into the role slowly, the organization still benefits from the momentum. Some fans have already started projecting further ahead. A scenario where Shadyer becomes the face of the franchise by the time the new stadium opens. A symbol of a shift in identity. A player tied to the next chapter of Browns football rather than its past. Again, that's speculation. But it's not random speculation. It's rooted in how franchises think when they see alignment between talent, timing, and attention. And if history tells us anything, it's that when teams sense that alignment, they don't rush to announce it. They let it unfold. Because once a future becomes official, flexibility disappears. For now, the Browns have something far more valuable. Possibility. And in a league built on control, possibility is the one asset you never give away too early. The reason this story keeps pulling people in has less to do with depth charts and more to do with recognition. Because for a lot of fans, Shadyer Sanders doesn't feel like just another quarterback trying to make it in the league. He feels familiar, not because of hype, but because of the path he's taken to get here. He wasn't handed anything quietly. He didn't glide into the NFL with universal approval. He was debated, questioned, passed over. And when his name finally got called, it came with an unspoken message: prove it again. That experience resonates. So many people watching have lived some version of that story. Being told you're not ready. Being overlooked despite doing the work. Watching others get opportunities while you wait. And then being expected to perform without complaint once your chance finally comes. What makes Shadyer's situation hit differently is how he's responded. There's been no public resentment, no finger-pointing, no attempts to rewrite the narrative in his favor. Instead, he's stayed composed. He's taken responsibility even when things broke down around him. He's spoken with intention in moments where frustration would have been easy. That kind of restraint is rare. especially under a spotlight that feels disproportionate to the role he was given. And people notice that. For many fans, especially those who rarely see themselves reflected in leadership positions within football, this story carries extra weight. It's not framed as defiance. It's framed as dignity. Showing up prepared, speaking carefully, letting actions speak when words would be easier. That approach cuts across demographics. It resonates with young athletes trying to break through systems that weren't designed with them in mind. With professionals who have been underestimated in their careers, with anyone who's had to work twice as hard just to be taken seriously. And that's why this story travels. It doesn't rely on local loyalty or team allegiance. It relies on emotion, on shared experience, on seeing someone navigate a difficult environment without losing themselves in the process. That's also why criticism hasn't slowed the momentum. In many ways, it's fueled it. Because the more doubt surrounds him, the more people feel invested in watching how he responds. Not in a dramatic, confrontational way, but in a quiet, controlled one. This isn't the typical sports underdog narrative where everything flips overnight. It's slower, more subtle, more human. And that makes it stick. It also explains why conversations around Shadur often drift away from football entirely. They move toward culture, toward representation, toward what it means to lead without being granted authority first. That's not something stats can capture. It's something people feel. And when fans feel connected to a story at that level, it stops being about whether someone deserves a role. It becomes about watching them claim it on their own terms. That's why this moment matters. Not because of what's already happened, but because of what it represents to so many watching. A reminder that sometimes being overlooked isn't the end of the story. It's the part that makes the rest worth paying attention to. So after all the numbers, the reactions, the silence, and the speculation, the story comes down to a single question that refuses to go away. What if this was never a gamble? What if the Browns didn't accidentally stumble into something valuable, but recognized it early and chose to move quietly while everyone else was distracted? Because when you strip away the noise, a pattern starts to emerge. A late-round pick generating first-round attention. A rookie contract delivering superstar-level demand. A quarterback being discussed globally while officially sitting low on the depth chart. None of that happens by chance. At some point, coincidence stops being a reasonable explanation. This is where the conversation shifts from football evaluation to decision-making, because talent alone doesn't explain what's unfolding. Plenty of talented players fade into obscurity every year. What separates this situation is alignment, timing, opportunity, and a front office that isn't forced to rush. If you're a billionaire owner looking at this landscape, the question becomes simple. Do you chase the familiar path, spend tens of millions on the next prospect, and hope the market responds? Or do you lean into the player who's already proven he can move people before he ever becomes the official face of your franchise? That's the decision hovering over Cleveland. And based on how things have played out so far, it's a decision they don't need to make publicly. Not yet. Silence, in this case, isn't uncertainty. It's leverage. It allows the Browns to watch, measure, and adjust without committing to a narrative that can't be undone. Some fans believe the choice has already been made. Others think it's too early to tell. The truth likely sits somewhere in between. But one thing is clear, this story isn't slowing down. Every jersey sold, every clip shared, every debate reignited adds pressure. Not pressure to act, but pressure to recognize what's happening in plain sight. Because the league is watching now. And so are fans across the world who didn't plan on caring about the Cleveland Browns, but suddenly do. That's not normal, that's not accidental, and it's not something teams can ignore forever. The real question is whether Shadur Sanders can become a franchise quarterback. That will be answered with time, reps, and opportunity. The real question is whether the NFL is prepared for what happens if he does. Because if this trajectory continues, Cleveland isn't just developing a player. They're cultivating a symbol, a bridge between sport, culture, and business in a way the league rarely gets right. And if you're Jimmy Haslam, staring at those numbers, those reactions, and that momentum, you're not asking whether this makes sense on paper. You're asking how often an opportunity like this actually comes along. History suggests the answer is almost never. Which is why this story doesn't end with a depth chart update or a training camp headline. It ends with a decision that will define a franchise's future. And until that decision is made, one question will keep hanging in the air. Did the Browns just find the most valuable quarterback in football without anyone realizing it yet?
If you enjoyed today's breakdown and want to keep up with all the drama, trades, and behind-the-scenes action in the NFL, then don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps this channel grow and lets us know you love this kind of content. And hey, don't keep it to yourself. Share this video with your friends, your group chats, or anyone who loves football as much as you do. The more the conversation spreads, the better it gets. Most importantly, if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss when we drop fresh stories, wild rumors, or breaking updates that the mainstream media won't talk about.